The morning sun peeled back the mist over the rolling Wyoming prairie, revealing the quiet sprawl of Morgan Ranch. The wind rolled gently through the yellowed grass like a memory. There was no music, no movement beyond the steady clop of hooves and the creak of leather as Eli Morgan guided his old bay gelding down the narrow ridge trail, just like he did every morning before the rooster crowed. His face was weather-worn and sun-dark, the kind of man who looked carved from the land itself. 38 years old, lean and hardened, Eli moved with the deliberate grace of someone who no longer rushed. There was no one waiting for him. No wife warming the bed, no children chasing each other in the dirt outside the barn. Just the dogs, the horses, and the silence. Always the silence. He preferred it that way now. It didn't ask questions. The barn groaned when he pushed the door open, same as it did every morning. He tossed down feed, checked the water lines, rubbed down the horses. Everything had its place. Everything had its time. That was how Eli kept his world turning. Routine and discipline. Even if the only thing waiting for him was another endless stretch of wind and sun. Once, many years ago, he had wanted something else. A home filled with the sounds of little feet, a strong son to carry the Morgan name, maybe a daughter to ride bareback through the alfalfa fields with her mama's wild hair flying behind her. Those dreams had lived and died between doctor's visits in Cheyenne, the air always thick with words no one wanted to say. Infertile, irreversible, unexpected, but final. He remembered the way his late father, Jacob Morgan, sat quiet on the porch after hearing the news. Eli was 27 at the time, young, married, hopeful. By then, he'd already built half the new barn with his bare hands. He thought life was finally beginning. Jacob hadn't said much, just nodded, took a drag from his pipe and muttered, "Ain't no shame in it. But the Morgan name ends here then." He said it like he was talking about putting down a sick horse. Eli didn't argue. What was there to say? Shame in it. The marriage didn't survive long after that. 2 years of silence, of trying to pretend it didn't matter, of pretending his wife didn't look out the window and cry when no one was watching. She left quietly. No screaming, no affair, just a note that said, "I need something more." Now it was 10 years later. The ranch had survived droughts and storms and the plague of loneliness. And Eli, he'd grown used to the weight of being the last Morgan. It was the kind of thing you stopped feeling, like an old scar on the inside. He finished the morning rounds, washed the sweat off his neck, and changed into town clothes. Nothing fancy, just a cleaner shirt and hat without dust caked on the brim. The general store had sent word a few things were finally in stock: salt blocks, fencing nails, kerosene. He hitched the wagon and made his way down the long dirt path, trailing behind a cloud of dust that faded into the emptiness. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much, just a stretch of buildings clinging to life around the crossroads. It had a single saloon, a sheriff's office, and a handful of shops, all wearing the same sun-bleached face. Folks in town knew Eli, nodded to him when they saw him, but didn't ask questions. He wasn't one to linger. As he drove the wagon past the saloon, he noticed a bigger-than-usual crowd gathered near the auction pens. That was odd. Livestock auctions weren't scheduled until next week. He almost kept going, but something in the air, a strange tension, the way people were laughing too loud, pulled at him. Eli slowed the horses and stepped down, leaving the wagon shaded beside the blacksmith's awning. He pushed through the crowd, and that's when he saw her. She was tall. Not just tall, commanding. Her arms were bound with rough rope at the wrists, but she wasn't cowering. Her back was straight, shoulders wide and proud, chin high even as the sun beat down. Hair like scorched wheat spilled around her dirt-smeared face. One eye was swelling from a bruise, and her lip was split, but her gaze didn't waver. They had her tied to a post like a wild animal. A man in a checkered vest, Floyd Banner, the auctioneer, stood beside her on the wagon bed, fanning himself with a dirty hat and grinning like he was selling a prize hog. "Ladies and gents," Floyd called out, "I give you the beast herself, stronger than 3 men, mouth like a sailor, and too wild for any decent home. Name's Willa Dane. Been passed through 2 ranches already. Broke a man's collarbone and bit another. Hell, she tossed Big Roy Barnes into a water trough last week." The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "She come with a muzzle?" "She comes with chains," Floyd said, laughing with them. "No papers, no family, no promises. But if you need a brute to haul lumber or wrangle bulls, she'll do, long as you don't mind the risk." Willa didn't say a word. Her lips twitched once, but no sound came. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Disdainful, calm. She'd seen worse. That was plain enough. Eli felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't sure what. Not pity, not desire. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe. He didn't raise his hand. He just said, low and firm, "I'll take her." Floyd paused. The crowd stilled. "You what?" the auctioneer asked. "I said I'll take her," Eli repeated, stepping forward. "No need for bids. I'll give you $10 and a sack of oats." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. "You serious, Morgan?" someone asked. "She'll gut you in your sleep." Eli didn't answer. His eyes never left Willa's. Floyd scratched his jaw. "Well, hell, I suppose $10 is better than nothing. Sold then, to Mr. Morgan." The rope was handed to Eli like a leash. He didn't take it. Instead, he cut it loose with his knife and tossed it aside. Willa looked down at her freed hands, then back up at him. "I ain't gonna chain you," he said quietly, "but you ride quiet, and you don't run." Still, she said nothing. He walked back to his horse, mounted up, and gestured. She followed. No words exchanged, no thanks given. The town watched them go in stunned silence. One man spat on the ground. A woman crossed herself. Eli didn't care. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the only sound, the wind brushing the grass and the creak of saddles. She didn't speak. Neither did he. When they reached the house, he opened the door and motioned her inside. "You can take the spare room," he said. "Water's in the kitchen. Clean clothes in the chest if you want 'em." Willa stared at him for a long moment, then stepped inside, brushing past him like a shadow. Eli stood on the porch after she disappeared into the house. The sky was starting to turn gold, the sun slipping behind the hills. He didn't know what he'd just done, but for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. The spare room smelled like pine and dust. Willa stood in the doorway, her wide shoulders nearly filling the frame, hands still hanging loose at her sides. She hadn't spoken since the moment he cut her rope. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't timid. It was measured, watchful. Like a mountain cat waiting to see which direction the wind would shift. She'd lived in worse places. A dirt shed behind a slaughterhouse, a barn loft with holes in the roof, even a damp root cellar in one godforsaken town where the man who owned her thought too wild meant something to conquer. This room, by contrast, had 4 solid walls, a clean quilt folded on a narrow bed, and a pitcher of water on the table. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the mattress, not because she trusted him, but because for the first time in months, no one was watching her like a spectacle. There were no locks, no chains, no threats, just wood, wind, and the distant creak of saddle leather outside. Eli didn't follow her. He fed the animals, checked the hinges on the barn gate, then leaned on the fence post and stared out at the hills like he always did. The ranch looked the same, but something about it felt different now. She didn't run. When morning broke, Willa was already outside. Eli found her by the trough, sleeves rolled, shoulders glinting with sweat, hauling feed sacks without being asked. He said nothing, and neither did she. By the 3rd day, she'd fixed the broken hinge on the south gate. On the 4th, she dug out the blocked irrigation trench with a pickaxe like she'd been born with it in hand. Eli watched from the porch, brow furrowed, and slowly returned to his own chores. He didn't ask her why she worked. She didn't ask what he wanted from her. They moved around each other with the kind of quiet rhythm only 2 loners could understand. Her presence as sharp as a whip, his as steady as a river stone. At night, she ate in silence. Fork in hand, back straight, eyes cautious but never downcast. She wasn't used to this kind of peace, and she didn't know what to do with it. The first week passed like that. Wordless labor, distant stares, and the creak of a house learning to breathe with two inside it. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west, dragging darkness across the sky like a warning. Eli was out in the pasture when the wind picked up. He whistled for the dogs and started toward the barn when he saw Willa sprinting, barefoot and fast, across the field. The young colt, barely 2 months old, was tangled in wire near the creek. Eli shouted, but Willa didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside the thrashing animal, arms wrapped around its neck, whispering low. Her voice, barely audible in the wind, calmed it as she worked the wire loose. By the time Eli reached her, the colt was standing, trembling but safe, and Willa's arms were scratched raw from elbow to wrist. "You get cut?" he asked. She looked up at him, rain running down her face like tears she didn't know how to cry. "Nothing deep," she said. Her voice was rough, low, like stones on dry ground. He offered a hand. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was strong, calloused. They walked back to the barn together. The next morning, Eli found a fresh bundle of kindling by the hearth. He didn't ask. By the end of the second week, something had shifted. She started humming under her breath while she worked, short bursts of melody, no lyrics. It made the horses twitch their ears and lift their heads. Eli didn't interrupt. They began to move like parts of the same machine, repairing fences, herding cattle, tending the land. Willa worked harder than any hired man Eli had ever known. She never complained, never asked for rest, and never backed away from the dirtiest task. But her eyes, those sharp, searching eyes, never stopped watching. She was still waiting for the catch. One evening, after supper, Willa stood on the porch, arms folded. The horizon glowed with the last orange scraps of daylight. Eli stepped outside and leaned against the railing, not too close. "You never asked why I was there," she said finally. Eli tilted his head. "Didn't reckon it was my business." "It usually is." He nodded. "You don't strike me as someone who lets herself be owned." "I wasn't owned. I was discarded." He didn't reply. She looked at the dirt road beyond the gate. "The first man that took me in thought I was a prize. Said a woman who could lift more than a mule would be useful. Then he tried to break me in other ways. I broke his nose instead." Eli's jaw tensed. "The next one figured fear would keep me quiet. Locked me in a smokehouse once. That didn't last either." "I don't lock doors," Eli said. She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "Then why take me?" He stared at the sky a long moment before answering. "You look like someone who'd been caged too long. I don't like cages." They stood in silence again. A coyote howled in the distance. "You gonna keep me on?" she asked. "As long as you want to stay." She studied him, as if measuring the weight of his answer. "I work," she said. "I don't serve." "I know." "I don't share a bed." "I don't owe affection." "I never asked." She stepped down from the porch and looked back at him. "You're different," she said, "but I don't trust you yet." "You don't have to." She nodded once, sharp and final, then disappeared into the barn. The next morning, Eli found the pasture gate fixed and the firewood stacked higher than before. She didn't trust him, but she hadn't run, and that meant something. By the third week, Willa had taken over half the ranch chores without a word. She handled the ornery mare no one else could approach. She led a downed calf through a rainstorm to shelter. She started carving small wooden tokens in her free time, little animals, smooth and simple. Eli found one left on the porch rail, a horse with a crooked leg. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, then set it on the windowsill inside. That day she spoke again. "You got any plans for spring?" she asked, watching the clouds roll. "Maybe build out the corral, replant the north field." She nodded. "I'll help." The way she said it, simple and direct, told him more than any letter of promise ever could. That night, she sat at the table instead of by the door. She still ate in silence, but she was no longer waiting for the door to open behind her. The wind outside shifted. The ranch had changed. The land felt steadier, the shadows not so heavy. Eli Morgan, the man who had stopped dreaming, found himself looking at the future, not with hope, but with something stronger, with certainty. And Willa Dane, the woman who wouldn't bow, had begun to plant her roots, not in fear, not in debt, but in choice. She had stayed. And Eli was beginning to understand what that truly meant. The summer heat came early that year. By the first week of June, the ground cracked where the rain hadn't touched, and the cattle spent more time in the shadows of cottonwoods than out in the field. The flies thickened, buzzing in clouds around the watering holes, and the air smelled of dust and sun-baked leather. Willa moved through the heat like it didn't touch her. She worked bare-armed under the sun, her skin bronzed and nicked with fresh scars, never once slowing as she hauled hay, reset fence posts, or dragged sacks of grain across the barn. Sweat rolled down her spine and soaked her shirt, but she kept going. She liked it this way. She didn't say it, but the labor gave her something she'd never had before, a rhythm she could control. Eli watched her sometimes, not to leer, not to question, but because he couldn't quite believe how easily she had folded herself into the bones of the ranch. She didn't fill space with small talk or demands. She just did what needed doing, same as he did. And in that silence, a kind of unspoken trust was being hammered out between them, firm and sure. One afternoon, as the two of them wrangled the stubborn bull back toward the pens, the animal charged unexpectedly. Willa didn't flinch. She stood her ground and clapped her hands once, sharp and loud. The bull stopped, lowered its head, backed away. Eli said nothing, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer that day. They started taking meals together, not every night, but more often than not. Willa didn't eat with her head bowed. She didn't wait to be served. She took what she needed, passed the rest, and never asked for more. She spoke sometimes now, in short sentences that grew longer with each week. She told him about the girl she used to be, the one who grew up on the edge of a logging camp, raised by a drunk uncle and ignored by everyone else. She never knew her mother. Her father had died before she was born. By the time she was 13, she was taller than most men, stronger than all the boys, and already carrying bruises from men who didn't know what to do with a girl who couldn't be pushed. Eli listened. He didn't try to soothe or fix. He let her speak and stayed with her in the silence that followed. One night he poured them both a cup of whiskey and lit a fire in the hearth, even though the evening was warm. Willa sat on the floor with her back to the wall, legs stretched out, a worn rag polishing her knife blade. Eli sat in the rocker, cup resting on his knee. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Willa looked at the flames. "Used to. And now?" She shrugged. "Not sure where I'd go. This place, it don't ask for pieces of me I can't give." He nodded slowly. "That's all I want." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, exactly, but the edge of something softer. The next morning, Eli went into town to collect supplies. Willa offered to come, but he shook his head. "Let him talk. You don't need to hear it." She didn't argue, just handed him the list. Dry Creek was bustling when Eli arrived. The general store was half restocked, and the smell of roasting pork floated in from the saloon, where a group of men were already half drunk despite the hour. Eli tied off his horse, tipped his hat to the sheriff, and stepped into the store. Inside, the murmurs began. "They say she's still out there," one woman whispered. "Living in the house with him. Like an animal." "God forgive him," another said. "That woman's cursed. Look at what she did to Roy Barnes." Eli didn't flinch. He gathered his goods, paid in full, and said nothing. But the longer he stood among them, the clearer it became. Willa's presence wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a wedge, splitting the town into those who feared her and those who were too curious to speak against her. He packed the wagon and was preparing to leave when Floyd Banner stepped out of the saloon, already drunk, his vest open, sweat beading under his arms. "Morgan," he called out, slurring the name like a joke. "How's your beast of a woman? Still chewing through fence posts? Eli turned, calm as ever. She's keeping my ranch running. What's yours doing? The men on the porch laughed. But not all of them. Some shifted uncomfortably. Floyd sneered. She's not natural. You know that. You'll see. Give it time. You bring fire into your house, don't be surprised when it burns you. Eli looked him straight in the eyes. She's not fire. She's the forge. He mounted up and rode out without another word. When he returned, he found Willa splitting logs out back. He didn't mention the town. She didn't ask. But that night, as they sat by the fire again, she said something unexpected. They'll never stop. I know. You'll lose contracts, friends. I've got enough of both. She looked down at her hands. You're not like them. Neither are you. She took a long breath. That makes us dangerous. He nodded. Good. The next week, she walked into town by herself. Eli didn't stop her. He watched her stride away, tall and silent, wearing a patched linen shirt and pants rolled at the ankles, a bandana around her wrist, and no weapon in sight. She went to the blacksmith, ordered a new bridle, then to the feed store, where she dropped off coin without speaking. People stared. Some moved out of her way. Others whispered behind hands. A young girl peeked from behind her mother's skirt and smiled. Willa smiled back. But when she turned the corner, 3 men blocked her path. Rough farm hands, half drunk and eager for trouble. You lost, sweetheart? One asked. No, she said. You sure? Maybe we ought to help you find your way back, or show you what happens when animals walk upright. Willa's eyes flicked from one to the other. Her shoulders rolled back. I won't ask you to move again, she said. They laughed. One grabbed her arm. By the time Eli got word, 2 of the men were in the infirmary. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder. The third had run off before she got to him. Willa was sitting outside the sheriff's office, arms folded, eyes unreadable. The sheriff met Eli at the door. I got half the town asking me to lock her up. She was defending herself, Eli said. I believe that, but it won't matter, not to them. Eli looked at Willa. She met his eyes, calm as ever. I'll pay the fine, he said, whatever it is. There ain't a fine for being hated, the sheriff replied. They rode home together without speaking. That night, Willa sat at the table long after the food was gone. Eli poured her a drink, and she downed it in one swallow. I should leave. No, I'm making trouble. No, they are. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without suspicion. You don't flinch, she said. Neither do you. She reached across the table and placed one of her carved tokens in his hand. This one was a woman standing with her arms raised, shoulders wide, head tilted up. No chains. He turned it over in his palm. That you? It's who I was before they tried to break me. And now, she shrugged, I'm remembering. They sat in the dark, the wind pressing against the walls, the fire crackling low. Neither spoke again that night, but something deeper had been forged between them, something quieter than love, stronger than blood. It was recognition, and somewhere in the stillness, the ranch, once just dust and duty, had become something else entirely. It had become home. The rains came late that season. When they did, they came hard, slashing across the land in sheets that turned the earth to thick brown soup and left the cattle huddled together under the ridgelines. Willa didn't slow down. She worked through the rain like it was nothing more than another layer of the sky, her shoulders soaked, her hands blistered, her face grim but focused. Eli watched her from the barn one morning as she let a panicked heifer out of a gully filling fast with water. She slipped once, landed hard but rose again without a sound. The calf followed her, trembling and confused but safe. He didn't call out to her, he just met her with a dry blanket and a nod when she returned to the porch. They had started to speak more in recent weeks, not in idle conversation, but in shared thinking. Willa would mention a section of fence sagging near the north line, and Eli would be there that evening with fresh timber. Eli would say the shed needed re-roofing, and she'd have half the shingles set by morning. There was no need for discussion. They had become a two-person machine. tuned to the land and each other. But the town had not forgotten. Every time Eli went into Dry Creek, the eyes followed him like shadows clinging to his boots. The saloon stopped serving him a clean glass. The general store clerk began making mistakes with his order. And always there were the whispers. The beast woman, the one who broke men, the one he let in his home. Sheriff Holloway had warned him once, gently, that not everyone was as quiet in their judgment as they used to be. Something about the way Willa existed, free, powerful, and unwilling to bow, unsettled people. Eli didn't answer the warning. He just nodded, paid for his goods, and rode home. Willa was worth it. Then came the festival. The town's spring gathering was tradition, going back to before most families had roofs. It wasn't much, just a collection of pie tables, fiddle music, and the scent of roasted meat in the air. Normally, Eli would have avoided it. He hated crowds. But this year, the ranch needed a new plowshare, and the festival brought traveling smiths and merchants. He told Willa he'd go alone. She didn't argue. She stood in the barn doorway that morning, wiping oil from her fingers, her hair tied back with a strip of faded red cloth, her face unreadable. "You sure?" she asked. He nodded. "You go, and they'll poke the bear." Her mouth twitched. "I'm not the bear, I'm the mountain, I know." She turned back to the forge. "Come back before dark." He left, without saying more. The festival was already loud when he arrived. Children laughing, music tumbling through the air like wind on water, and the sizzle of meat fat over open flames. People nodded at him. A few even smiled, as if pretending nothing had changed. But he saw it in their eyes, the tightness, the calculation, the space they gave him as he passed. He found the plowshare, bartered with a smith from Laramie, and packed it into his wagon. Just as he was mounting up, he heard the voice. "Where's your wild woman today, Morgan? Keeping her on a chain? Or did she finally chew through it?" It was Clarence Dobbins, son of one of the town councilmen. He was young, loud, and dumb, in a way only men with unearned confidence could be. His two friends laughed behind him. Eli looked at him once, calm and steady. "Walk away, Clarence." Clarence stepped forward, emboldened by the crowd. "She even a woman, really? Or did you buy yourself a circus beast and teach it to wear boots?" Someone chuckled. Someone else turned away, uncomfortable. Eli stepped down from the wagon. The silence that followed was heavy. He crossed the space between them in 5 slow steps, eyes locked on Clarence. No threats, no fists. "Say her name again," Eli said, voice low. Clarence swallowed. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Eli leaned in. "Her name is Willa Dane. You want to insult her? You better say it out loud, like a man." Clarence's lips twitched. He looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes watching. No one stepped in. No one laughed now. "I didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered. Eli held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and mounted the wagon. He left town without another word. When he arrived at the ranch, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills. The light was golden and stretched long across the field. But something was wrong. The dogs were barking, high-pitched, alert. The gate was open. One of the horses was loose, skittering in the yard, and Willa's tools were scattered near the barn. Eli dropped from the wagon and ran. He found her behind the corral, surrounded. 3 men. Faces he recognized. Locals. One with a club, another with a length of rope. Willa was bleeding from the temple. One knee bent awkwardly, dirt smeared across her cheek. But she was standing. Eli didn't shout. He didn't draw. He grabbed the first man by the collar and slammed him against the barn wall so hard the boards cracked. The man went limp before he hit the ground. Willa had already handled the second. He was groaning in the dirt, cradling a broken arm. The third, the one with the rope, turned to run. Willa caught him. She didn't hit him. She simply grabbed his shirt and yanked him down to the ground with a force that defied sense. He looked up at her, terrified. "Go," she said, "and don't come back." He went. Eli stood there, breathing hard, fists clenched. Then he turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, wiped her face. "Could have been worse." He looked her over. "You need Doc Henley." "I need a drink." He barked a laugh. It startled both of them. They walked inside together. An hour later, the sheriff arrived. "They're saying she attacked him unprovoked," he said. Eli didn't answer. "They want her charged." The Dobbins boys got pull. "Counsel's calling a hearing." Willa sat on the porch, a strip of cloth tied around her temple, her face unreadable. "I'll be there," Eli said. The sheriff looked from one to the other, sighed, and left. The hearing was set 3 days later. It was held in the town hall, packed shoulder to shoulder with townsfolk, most of them waiting for a spectacle. Willa stood at the front, arms folded, bruises still dark on her face. Eli stood beside her, calm and silent. The counsel read the charges: assault, violence, endangerment. Then they asked her to speak. Willa raised her chin. "I defended myself." Someone scoffed. The councilman cleared his throat. Eli stepped forward. "She didn't ask for this. They came onto our land. They broke in. They meant to do harm." "You weren't there," one man said. "I saw enough." The room murmured. "She's dangerous," Clarence's father said. "Unstable. She don't belong here." Eli looked at them all. "She works harder than any man in this room. She's fixed half the land you all let rot. She's earned her place. She's not a wife, not a worker, not even a—" Eli's voice rose. "She's not yours to define." The room went still. "I can't give the world a son," he said. "I can't pass on the Morgan name. But I can leave this place better than I found it. And she's helping me do that." He turned to Willa. "She doesn't belong in a cage. She was born to ride beside someone, not behind. And I'm damn lucky it's me." No one spoke. Finally, one voice, an old woman in the back, said, "Let her be." Another nodded. The council whispered, deliberated, argued. Then finally, "She stays. But she steps out of line again. She's out. That's the best we can give." Eli looked at Willa. She nodded once. They walked out together. Back at the ranch, she stood by the porch rail looking out at the dusk. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, something like warmth in her eyes. "You still don't flinch." He smiled. "Neither do you." She stepped closer, close enough for her voice to drop. "I ain't ever had someone speak for me like that. You don't need anyone to, but I will, every time." She leaned against the railing beside him, and for the first time she let her shoulder rest lightly against his. No chains, no fences. Just silence, and the wild that finally had a place to stay. The air turned cooler in the weeks that followed. Summer bowed to early autumn, painting the Wyoming hills in brittle gold and streaks of faded red. The mornings came slower now, with frost clinging to the tips of the grass and the horses huddling closer in the stalls. Smoke from the chimney wound lazily into the sky most days, and the air carried the scent of split pine, earth, and faint traces of rain that never quite came. Willa rose with the sun, same as Eli, but now they shared coffee on the porch before splitting off to their separate tasks. She rarely spoke first, but her silences had softened, no longer tense with anticipation or caution. They were comfortable now, the quiet between them filled with things that didn't need saying. She didn't need to ask if he trusted her. He didn't need to ask if she was staying. They both knew. The barn roof had finally been replaced. Together they'd carried the beams, hammered the nails, and balanced across rafters like two parts of a single body. Eli had caught her once when she slipped, her boots skidding across a damp plank. She hadn't yelped, hadn't panicked, just steadied herself in his arms and said, "Well, that was dumb." He'd laughed then, a deep, full sound that echoed across the field, and for the first time, she laughed too. It was short, rough, almost like it surprised her, but it was real. The dogs had grown attached to her, especially the youngest one, a scrawny mutt named Cole, who followed her from fence to fence like a shadow. One morning she found him tangled in chicken wire, yelping and snapping at his own paw. Without a word, she knelt, wrapped her arms around him, and freed him with the same hands that could break a man's nose. Cole hadn't left her side since. Eli watched all this quietly. He took fewer trips into town. He no longer cared what the whispers said, because each day on the ranch brought proof that what they'd built, however unorthodox, was strong and right and whole. The days grew shorter. The harvest came and went. Willa helped him bring in the last of the grain from the north field, and that night they sat on the porch with aching backs and muddy boots. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked, breaking the long silence. Willa took a long breath. "You mean after this season?" "No, I mean after all of it. When we're too old to swing a hammer, when the horses are gone, when the land's not ours anymore." She looked out across the fields. "Never thought I'd live long enough to ask that question." He turned to her. "You're not just surviving anymore." She nodded. "No, I guess I'm not." "I've been writing my will," he said. "Got a lawyer from Cheyenne coming next month." She tensed, just slightly. "You dying?" "No, just planning." She didn't say anything, but he saw the shift in her jaw. "I'm leaving the ranch to you," he added. She looked at him sharply. "You what?" "It's yours. Everything on it. Everything in it. If something happens to me, or even if it doesn't, I want you to have it." Her face twisted into something unreadable. "I didn't come here to take what's yours." "You didn't take anything. You earned it." She shook her head slowly. "You're trying to make this permanent." "I already did." She stood, walked a few steps out into the yard, fists clenched. "You don't know what that means," she said. "I do. I ain't a wife. I ain't your blood. People will." "People already talk." She turned to him, eyes wet and furious. "This place, it's the first thing that's ever been mine, but it was yours first. I don't want pity land." He stood too, slow and calm. "It's not pity. It's peace. You gave this place its soul back. You gave me mine, too." She stepped closer. "And what do I give you now? A name for gossip? A place to hang your legacy when there's no son to carry it?" "No," he said, voice firm. "You give me a reason to want tomorrow." She froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He took another step. "I don't need a wife. I don't need a child. I need someone who can ride beside me until the end. That's you." Her breath hitched. "You don't have to stay because I asked," he said. "You stay because it's already yours. In here." He tapped his chest. They stood in the blue light of early evening. Shadows long across the porch, the hills behind them stretching out toward forever. She looked at the house, the barn, the trees they'd planted together. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "But I get the south bedroom. You snore like a bear." He laughed again, full and deep, and this time so did she. Winter set in fast. Snow fell hard that first week of November, blanketing the ground in white silence. The ranch slowed. Work changed. It became about warmth, preservation, and waiting. They spent more evenings indoors, the fire always crackling, the air thick with stew or bread, or the scent of burning wood. Willa started reading by lantern light, old books Eli had stored away and forgotten. She marked the pages with thin scraps of leather and sometimes mumbled quotes under her breath. Eli carved now, his rough fingers shaping pieces of wood into animals to match hers. One night he handed her a carving of a woman on horseback, hair flying, arms free. Willa stared at it for a long time. Then she set it on the mantel beside his. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. In town, people changed. Slowly. Some still glared. But others, especially the women, began asking questions. They heard of her work, her skill with animals, her strength. A widow asked if Willa could help her son break a colt. A shopkeeper asked if she could help repair the store's doorframe. Willa never smiled in public, but she said yes. She rode into town now without fear. She returned with flour, rope, and stories she rarely told but carried in her eyes. The last snowfall came heavy. It collapsed the old chicken coop roof. She and Eli spent the better part of a day shoveling snow, laughing between curses, their clothes soaked and cheeks red. That night they drank mulled cider by the fire and sat closer than usual. She rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. The ranch had changed again. No longer just land, not just a sanctuary. It had become the future. A few days later, Willa walked to the east pasture alone, checking the fence line. There, beneath the cottonwood grove, a mare had gone into labor. Willa stayed with her, kneeling in the cold, whispering soft and low. When she returned, a newborn foal followed, wobbly on its legs, ears twitching. She led it to the barn, coaxing gently. Eli watched from the porch, something swelling in his chest that had no name. They named the foal Ember. Spring came slowly. The earth thawed. The buds returned, and the land stirred again with green. One morning, Willa saddled up and called over her shoulder. "You coming?" Eli stepped outside, hat in hand. "Where to?" She grinned. "Anywhere. Everywhere. We built this place. Now let's see the rest." He mounted up beside her. They rode into the morning, past the fields, past the creeks, past the edges of everything they'd once thought defined them. No chains. No brands. Just dust, wind, and the wide open. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. Because they were no longer the man who'd stopped dreaming, and the woman too wild to be kept. They were something else entirely. Together. In a world that tried to tame her and a life that nearly broke him, they found not just survival, but something wilder, truer, and stronger than anyone dared believe. No longer bound by the past, they rode forward together, not as legend, not as myth, but as two souls who refused to be anything but free. If this story moved you, don't ride off just yet. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles and saddle up for more unforgettable tales of untamed hearts, rugged lands, and the kind of love that stands side by side through every storm. Hit that bell so you never miss the next ride.